Um, right. Okay, I think that's everything. Yeah, I think that's so. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce the first panel session, which is AI in surveillance and war. And we have two really great speakers. The first is Anne Alexander, who's an author and journalist and is working on a book on the AI arms race and has a Substack if people are into Substacks. She's written an article in International Socialism Journal 187 on AI and imperialism, Anne Alexander. So if anyone's interested in the kind of reading more about it, these are available from the Bookmarks bookstall next door. And we've got Rory Gibson, who's a campaigner with Medact in Sheffield and Health Workers for a Free Palestine. And he coordinates the No Palantir in the NHS campaign in South Yorkshire. So we're going to have Anne first and then Rory, and then we'll open it up for questions. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much, Charlotte. Can everyone hear me okay? So I have the lucky position of being able to start off the entire event, which means that hopefully I can set a tone which at least will provoke some discussion. I want to start by saying that I'm an AI abolitionist. I do not think that anything that we as ordinary people can benefit at all from the thing that is called artificial intelligence, and even labeling large statistical models, which sometimes I do use in my actual research. I'm a researcher at the University of Cambridge for part of the time. Calling that artificial intelligence is of no use to any of us. And in fact, it is incredibly destructive, which is why we're here. I think that's important because actually labeling what's called artificial intelligence and the whole AI industry as producers of hype theatre, snake oil, mechanized plagiarism, academic conceits, and marketing dogma is really, really important, because that helps to justify the horrific things that I'm going to talk about briefly in my presentation. This is an example of lies, damned lies, and statistical inference, and another instance of movable type. A large language model is a statistical typewriter. A multimodal model, the kind where you put in a prompt and you get a picture out of it, is the typewriter connected to a statistical camera. Oh, and the answer definitely isn't 42. Now, some people recognize that. It's a quote from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which was an early 1980s TV show where they built a very big computer and spent a long time asking it what was the answer to the ultimate question, life, the universe, and everything. After a few billion years, it came back with the answer 42. This was clearly not very much use, so they were told to go away and think about what was the meaning of the question that they actually wanted to ask it. And I think that there is a right question that we can ask, one of which is not the ultimate question of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, nor is it even really about how do AI systems work, although I am going to talk a bit about that at a very high level, but also to ask ourselves, why do we think that AI systems work? Why do states and corporations want us to think that AI systems actually work in the way that they're intended to, they're presented? So just a very brief overview of what I mean when I'm talking about a statistical typewriter and a statistical camera, because this underlies all of the systems that I'm going to talk about in use in a context of Gaza, and briefly in the context of the immigration dragnets that, for example, Palantir are part of, and other large tech corporations are building in the US, and that our government wants to build, and our police force want to build, and so on and so forth. So the first point here is that most systems which are labeled as AI these days are based on large-scale statistical models. This is the machine learning version of AI, which is not the only version of things that have been called AI in the past. There was a previous iteration which was more about expert systems and symbolic programming languages and so on and so forth, and that ran out of steam in about the mid-1980s. Just a little test for yourself if you want to see this. If you've ever found the Google Ngram viewer, look up Google Ngram viewer on Google. It's a corpus, a massive data set of books that Google has digitized. And so you can look at the frequency of which words are mentioned in this collection of millions of books. And the curve that you get out for artificial intelligence is very interesting. It peaks in the mid-1980s, goes down and goes up again, because there was a massive wave of hype about artificial intelligence in the early 80s, a different form of it, not machine learning. The machine learning version is all about really scaling up statistical probability. So it means taking large data sets and computing statistics about them. So, for example, a collection of images and text. Important point here, this is statistics about the data, not about the world or people or societies or plants or animals or anything else. It's just what is in the data. And people are quite aware now of the problems with this, that what you put into the training data set will have a fundamental impact on what comes out of it. And then you can take an image, a text, an audio file, a video file, which isn't in the original data set, and compute how similar it is in mathematical terms to things that are in the data set. And lo and behold, this does often work as a kind of usable proxy for what we think are similar things. But also sometimes it doesn't. It fails all the time. I know this because if you look, for example, around image data sets, I mean, and I can show you examples of this if you're interested. Very different nearest neighbors will emerge from an image data set, depending on which model you use, and depending what was in the training data set, what weights were in the model, what was important to rank in terms of the features in the data set. So, for example, a model that looks at, kind of areas of color in a sort of high level approximation, and thinks those are, and presents those as more important, will come up with a very different match for an image compared to one which was focused on the edges of an image. That might sound a bit abstract, but it's just to kind of give you an idea. Another example of this would be, how could it work with classifying texts? Say you wanted to make a classifier using machine learning that classified science fiction novels. You could have a list of the frequency with which certain words were mentioned, like death rays, orbits, planets, hyperspace. Texts that had none of these words probably aren't science fiction novels, although again, you can also see the problems with this. If you have only one feature or a small number of features, they're not necessarily a very good proxy for the thing you're trying to classify, particularly if it's a very subjective thing, such as what constitutes a science fiction novel. The most important thing that you need to know about the so-called leap in capabilities of AI systems and the fact that we are in another hype cycle around AI as opposed to big data, which is what the same things were called 10 years ago, is that we've just scaled up a couple of things. We scaled up the number of the size of the data sets. A good example of this is there's a data set called ImageNet, which played a foundational role in the development of quite a lot of the AI image-based systems that are in use today. That had 12 million labeled images. Large image training data sets today, such as Lion, which is an open source one, has 5 billion labeled images. And that is a scaling up that's taken place over about 20 years. You do this process as well of classification millions and billions of times. That requires enormous amounts of computation. It requires very, very large amounts of servers in very, very, very large data centers, and they take humongous amounts of energy and minerals. Now, probably people will have heard of course, things like innovations such as the Chinese large language model DeepSeek, which actually used far fewer chips and data and apparently used a much smaller footprint in terms of the amount of time it took to do that. This is true. There are sometimes efficiencies that can be gained by making those kinds of changes in what's called the architecture of the machine learning system. But broadly speaking, we are just talking about brute force and scale in terms of the amount of data and the amount of compute, which is why there is an enormous competition going on across the world to secure access to these things. So I want to talk now briefly, though, about uses of so-called artificial intelligence in war situations. And I'm going to use an example from the use of so-called AI-based targeting systems that the Israelis have used in Gaza. This is part of research that I've done with a colleague, Matt Mahmoudi, who's a colleague at Cambridge and also has worked for Amnesty International in the past. We have a chapter in a book coming out about this. We looked at a number of systems that were being quite well documented, particularly by Plus 972 magazine, which is a magazine that is jointly edited and written for by Israeli and Palestinian journalists, and it's an investigative magazine that broke the story about the use of some of these systems to produce lists of so-called targets in Gaza that were being used to justify genocidal atrocities by the Israeli Air Force. In particular, there was a target list which had supposedly 37,000 names and details of people who were supposed to be members of Hamas's armed wing, or the armed wing of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, but they were mainly supposedly associated with Hamas. And this was used to justify a lot of the airstrikes that took place, particularly in the first wave of the war after 7th of October 2023. How was that list compiled? Yes, it seems that there was an AI model was used to generate that. In fact, there were a string of AI models that were used not only to generate the names, but also locations. One particularly sinisterly was part of a system called Where's Daddy, which was used to generate predictions of when the target would be at home with their family, so that the family could be destroyed along with the family home, along with the target. How was that composed? It was based on mass surveillance of the population, using census records, WhatsApp messages, phone taps, social media. There was a decision made, and this is actually a critical one, that essentially everyone in Gaza would be put into the model and then ranked according to, again, a set of calculations and correlations about their pattern of life, things that they were, inferred to have done, where they lived, who they associated with, and the pattern of life of a known set. Again, this is all in the mind of the Israeli soldiers who are doing this, a set of existing Hamas militants. Then you match the two. So you can see that there is the same kinds of operations are going on. It's just with a number of different data sets, the fusion of different types of data. And that's used to justify what is a mass assassination factory. But is this really AI deciding things? No, of course not. It's the decision was made by people at the top of the Israeli state who gave themselves permission to act in a genocidal manner. One of the things you can tell this by, again, is a back of the envelope calculation. What's called the non-combatant casualty cutoff value, which is the number of civilians that are allowed to be killed in a strike, was set, the minimum one was 20. Multiply 37,000 by 20, you get 750,000 people. Now, I don't actually think that the Israeli onslaught on Gaza has killed that many people, but it's quite likely to have killed at least 250,000. The point is that people who designed the system gave themselves permission to commit an atrocity on that scale. What does that tell you? It's nothing to do with AI. It tells you that they wanted to carpet bomb the place. They also chose 2,000-pound bombs to carry out assassinations on the grounds that you don't want to waste expensive bombs that might be more targeted on unimportant people. Again, this is something that's an actual quote from an Israeli soldier who was interviewed by Sophia Goodfriend, who wrote about this topic. So again, you can see how you have a combination of a set of inferred capabilities and a set of guesswork and probabilities that then is given the status by the decisions of the state, by the decisions of the army, and is used to justify essentially an exercise in unleashing a weapon of mass destruction. I want to say something briefly as well about how this operates in terms of the immigration dragnet that that Trump and ICE have been building in the States, because the similar kinds of things operate in terms of the data sources, the processes of fusing different types of data, of making correlations based on all sorts of these different sources, and then pinpointing the punitive action of the state towards the people who are caught in that dragnet. So one of the things that's recently been reported, for example, is that ICE are trying to build areas, neighborhoods, where they think that there are a high density of people who might be visa overstayers or people who they want to target. Now, if you think what that means, actually, they could use other means to do that. They don't need AI for that purpose. They could just use racist assumptions about that people of color, Black people, Latino people, and so on in particular neighborhoods, if it's a high, that the proportion, the demographic character of the neighborhood could stand in as a proxy, an easily usable profile for them doing an immigration raid on it. So you can see again that the logic of calling this AI versus the racist logics that work in the operations of the state interact with each other, and often the AI part of it is simply a kind of justification for a kind of a way of hiding what's really going on. Not that Trump or ICE actually hide their racism, of course. I mean, they are absolutely trumpeting the fact that they are racist and that they and that their purpose, that's what their purpose is. A couple of quick points before I hand over to Rory about resistance. It can seem absolutely overwhelming when you think about this kind of death-dealing infrastructure coming out of the sky and targeting you. And in a way, starting with cases about war and surveillance could make people feel less confident to challenge it. But I want to argue the opposite. Once you understand what AI is and what it isn't, you can see that actually the forms of resistance that we can do in our daily lives are absolutely just as essential as ever. So that means political resistance to the narrative about AI. It means also social resistance to AI and its infrastructure, challenging the data centers that are essential for the operation of these systems, challenging the use of energy and water for these destructive ends, just as we would oppose war and destruction in general, and political and social resistance to the states that want to use this language of AI in order to justify the unspeakable things that they do. I'll end it there.
So, hello, everybody. Firstly, thank you, Anne. That was just incredible. So really, it's just really, truly a privilege and a joy to be asked to speak to you all today, especially sat here next to Charlotte. My name is Rory. I'm a campaigner with both organisations Medact Sheffield and Health Workers for a Free Palestine, and I coordinate the No Palantir in the NHS South Yorkshire campaign. So a huge thank you for welcoming me from the other side of the Pennines. Linnea from the Manchester campaign sends her apologies, but I hope to be an adequate replacement. But that said, I can only dream to be as talented and inspiring as Linnea. So in the task of trying to convince you that this is not inevitable, I thought I'd separate my talk into 3 parts. Personally, I believe stories and human connection are really important to activism, particularly in the context of, say, artificial intelligence. So I'll tell you a little bit more about me, hopefully without overdoing it. I'll introduce you to the campaign, although I imagine many of you are already aware of it. And then I'll tell you about the actions that you can take here in Manchester or elsewhere if you've travelled far. So my political journey started by growing up in the South Wales valleys during the 90s. So we've had Scottish. I'll see if it can handle Welsh. Born to a social worker mum, becoming increasingly aware of the deprivation and inequities that plagued its post-industrial landscape. I moved to Sheffield for medical school and then started campaigning around migrant and refugee rights there. And then somehow I found myself living in the Scottish Highlands for quite a few years. And it's there that I became a bit more of a passionate environmentalist, engaging in campaign work with the likes of Extinction Rebellion and Highland Healthcare for Climate Action. Interestingly, I then found myself in this medical education role where I had the responsibility of engaging medical students in themes of environmental sustainability. But it was during that role that I became ever more focused and critical of the impact that our economic systems were having on our health, our societies, and our environment. Subsequently, there was then, of course, the escalation in the occupation and the genocide of the Palestinian people, which for me reflected in such clarity the hellish impact of capitalism and imperialism in this geopolitical monstrosity. I then moved back to Sheffield to start training as a GP, found my political home in Medact, Sheffield, which is a regional branch of a national charity that campaigns on issues of health and social justice. And then the call of the No Palantir in the NHS campaign reached me. And for me, it felt like the issues that I had campaigned for and so strongly believed in became encapsulated in this one campaign for which I knew that I needed to take action. For those of you unfamiliar with the No Palantir in the NHS campaign, it started back in 2023, where Palantir, who likely need an introduction, but just in case, are a US-based tech firm specializing in AI-powered surveillance and military software, headed up by Antichrist enthusiast and Trump supporter Peter Thiel, and pretty much self-proclaimed techno-fascist Alex Karp. Palantir were offered lucrative contract to head up the rollout of an NHS data infrastructure called the Federated Data Platform, also known as the FDP. A system designed to link up data from various aspects of the health system, centralize it, analyze it, provide insights on how to optimize services. Something that somewhat in concept we don't necessarily disagree with, but that said, the reality of what it is pretty far away from what was promised. This is in the context of Palantir having an ever-increasing chokehold on many of our public services. In healthcare, their involvement preceded this contract, where they had previously been awarded a contract to create a COVID-19 database by the Conservative government at a bargain of £1 for 3 months. And we know that this has been accompanied by many unminuted meetings held in secret and blatant conflicts of interest of people involved in the securing and strengthening of their contract and position in UK public services. For example, as I'm sure many people know, disgraced US Ambassador Peter Mandelson, heading up the consultancy firm Global Counsel, to whom Palantir are clients, facilitating meetings between the Cabinet, Prime Minister and Palantir. But then again, is anyone really surprised to hear that? I guess it's an excellent example of the state and private sector working together for the benefit of the ruling class in this vulture capitalist system, as described so eloquently in the book of the same name by commentator Grace Blakely. And you probably don't need me to tell you why we're so concerned about this, whether it be the impact this will have on data privacy, on patient trust in how their data is used, particularly by those who already face significant barriers to accessing care, or the ongoing privatization of our public services, or then just simply the enablement of a company complicit in a vast number of human rights abuses, whether that be the illegal deportation of American citizens by ICE, the genocide of the Palestinian people, or illegal imperialist invasions by the West in other parts of the world. But anyway, I don't think you're here to listen to me moaning about how bad Palantir are. You want me to tell you what we can do about it. Well, ever since this campaign was started by Health Workers for a Free Palestine back in 2023 in response to a call to action by the Palestinian health unions to cut our institutions' ties with companies complicit in genocide, the campaign truly has gone from strength to strength. Although I should note that the amazing organization Foxglove, who you should all check out if you don't know about them, were sounding the alarm about Palantir in the NHS even before this. So what started with a relatively small number of incredibly talented people who I truly am in awe of, mobilizing people to action back in 2023, leading to the likes of a blockade of NHS England's offices back in 2024 in protest to this contract. This campaign has exploded into both an amazing coalition of incredible organizations working together at a national level, including the likes of Good Law Project, Medact, Amnesty International, Corporate Watch, Foxglove, Just Treatment, tech unions. But in addition to this stuff happening at high level or national high level, we also now have an amazing network of grassroots campaigns working locally across the country, including here in Manchester and over in Sheffield and elsewhere in the UK. Because it was realised that there was an urgent need to disrupt the rollout of Palantir's FDP at a local level as well as a national one, forced by building pressure on local trusts and integrated care boards to resist the adoption of Palantir's technology. So what's happened and where have we been winning? Well, there have been some early wins, such as getting a British Medical Association motion passed, but it felt like the tide really started turning against Palantir. And I really do feel like the tide is turning against Palantir in this campaign when a briefing of concerns was published by Medact in coalition with those previously mentioned organizations. And that was published back in about March of this year. And this really turned up the national conversation about why it's not a good idea for the likes of the NHS to be doing business with Palantir. You may have seen in the news recently that so much has been done from a research perspective to try and counter the narrative that Palantir are providing the goods. Research done by members of the coalition as well as grassroots campaigns is showing that the numbers just simply do not add up. And embarrassingly for NHS England, just this week, they actually had to admit that and say that the data that they shared at a recent Health and Social Care Select Committee evidence plenary also doesn't prove the effectiveness of Palantir's FDP. And this kind of stuff is only happening through organising. But furthermore, at a parliamentary level, lobbying from the coalition brought about the recommendation by the Parliamentary Science, Innovation and Technology Committee that the UK government should exercise the break clause in the NHS's contract with Palantir, which takes place in February next year, a decision which needs to take place about 3 months before, meaning that as a campaign, we are going out whole hog in the next few months to prove that Palantir are not good partners for the NHS. And in the words of Palantir CEO Alex Karp, we are here to disrupt. Except we're not the ones that are going to kill people, which is how that infamous quote ends. We're just here to disrupt. So I'm really pleased to say that both Manchester and Sheffield are excellent examples of where this disruption is taking place. I'm sure you're all aware, if you're from Manchester, that Greater Manchester Integrated Care Board decided not to adopt the FDP. And this has been such an important precedent and has been such a useful talking point for the campaign, indicating that despite all the pressure, that it is not mandatory and that NHS institutions do have a choice. And whilst this decision is deemed to be multifactorial, we know that the alarm being raised by local campaigners on the ethics of Palantir did influence that decision. And then in Sheffield, you may have seen in the news, which happened just this week, after continuous attendance by the campaign at committee meetings to present the issue, as well as working alongside councillors, Sheffield City Council on Wednesday carried a motion submitted by the Greens, but backed unanimously by both Labour and the Liberal Democrats, calling on that UK government to exercise the contract's break clause and calling upon all local NHS institutions to pause and reverse the rollout of Palantir's FDP. This is the first declaration of its kind to happen in England by a city council, and I guess only time will tell how that translates into terms of actions taken by a local NHS. But we're there to put on the pressure. But it's just so exciting, and we're already hearing, I've already heard that the same is being talked about in Manchester. So if you are a member of a local political party, mobilize them, encourage a similar motion to be submitted. And again, this is creating a wave of local backlash against tech giants, which would not have been possible without grassroots organizing. Now, what opportunities are there here for you? Well, unions, and I know that this place, spiritual home of unions, have and will continue to be a big part of this campaign. For example, the BMA urging its members to boycott the use of Palantir. That has only been a powerful voice for the campaign. Group NHS data analysts together, they've put together an open letter in opposition of Palantir. And so for those of you who work in the digital or data sector, that's an open letter that you can sign, particularly if you are a member of a union. And this letter has already been backed by Unison, including by their leader. And so they're looking for other trade union branches and other relevant organizations to sign. So if that's something you're interested, do let me know and I can share that for you or your branch to sign. However, it should be noted that the deadline for that is actually Monday. So it's quite urgent that it gets discussed if you're interested. I'm also aware from my Manchester colleague, Linnea, that she's organising a Unite working group following conversations with local members. So if you are a member of Unite and you are interested in taking part, then I can also put you in touch. And furthermore, we do have a trade union group working at a national level who have developed template motions that can be used in your branches. So just come to me afterwards and I'm happy to share the details of those motions if you'd like. Going back before, if you are a member of a local political party, or even if you aren't a member, speak to your councillors, see if you can get a similar motion passed at a local authority level. And this campaign is about to launch their Back the Brake Clause campaign. And that is essentially going to be a push for local health leaders, MPs, community groups, trade unions, anyone who'll make it, essentially, to make a declaration calling upon the government and the Department of Health and Social Care to exercise the contract's break clause. So watch this space on what that will look like, but you can already start to contact these people and see what their positions are in advance. If you do want to be involved in local organising, speak to me. I can connect you with Linnea here in Manchester, but if you are here from another part of the UK, I can connect you, to another local group as well. But I guess finally, the most important way to get involved in this is just to be talking about it. We know that the NHS is a highly evocative subject and is considered by many to be one of, if not the most important issues in our society. And that's for some potentially even more so important than how our personal health data is handled. We know that this issue has stimulated a huge discussion about the direction of our health service, including who we give the power to in terms of how decisions are made. And currently, we see that power is increasingly being handed to tech giants of the US who simply do not share ours or our health services ethics and values. And the more people hear about it, the more understandably upset they become. When we win this, and it's not an if, it's a when, I believe it's going to stimulate a far bigger discussion about our NHS and the rest of our public services and who we allow to be responsible for them in the name of productivity, particularly when it comes to that being the owners of artificial intelligence technologies that I believe are designed to tear up our communities being a fundamental pillar to our health and well-being. And that's why I believe this campaign is so important. It strikes to the heart of our health, our well-being, our communities. We need to be talking about it, and I urge you, speak to your families, your neighbours, your colleagues, your friends, your comrades, meet with your councillors, your MPs, your board of directors at your local health trusts and integrated care boards. Tell them that the NHS as we know it is under threat. Speak to their hearts, the issues that are most important to them, and see how it relates to this, because once we hand these villains the keys, we likely won't get them back for a very long time. And finally, I really don't believe this is inevitable. Since joining this campaign, I have found so much joy connecting with those fighting against Palantir. And it, like I say, it really feels like the tides have been turning in our favour. So much so that I recently had the thrill of discussing the party that we are going to have when we win this and that break clause gets exercised. Because it is going to happen. I do believe it will. And I'm delighted to say that when it does happen and we have this party, I'll personally invite you all to it. Thank you.
Okay, what I'm going to do is open up for questions for both Anne and Rory before we go into sort of roundtable discussions. So if people want to, I'll take 3 questions at a time. Sorry, I've just dropped this on them. They didn't know this was happening. But I think people may have questions. So I'll take 3 questions at a time. And so if you want to put your hands up, and we'll just do that for about 10 minutes or so, and then people can go into, it's just to clarify, if people have got any points of clarification. And if you sort of speak for 3 minutes tops, but you don't have to speak for as long as 3 minutes. After 2 minutes, I will bang on the microphone. And also we might need a bit of a roving mic. Somebody. Sorry, I'm completely making this up as I go along. Thanks, Linda. Right, the guy right at the back, and then the women with the glasses, and then the women with the yellow top. Thanks.
What are you going to go about? This is for Anne, really. The Isaac Asimov, I suppose the 1950s, devised the 3 laws of robotics. A robot shall not kill a human being, starting with. And should this, is there any way it could be built into AI systems? Thanks.
Thanks very much for that. Yeah, I've got a few questions. One is about I don't know if everyone has been following the news recently that there's been this, it feels like an AI arms race that's going on everywhere at the moment, that is being kind of, particularly as Keir Starmer's going out the door, he's like, but AI, in every single institution that you can think of putting it in, including in the NHS. So one of the things which is being rolled out to everywhere for free at the moment is Microsoft Copilot to everywhere, looking at waiting list records, all your clinical records, all of your outpatient letters. All of that is going into AI right now, with the proviso that it allegedly increases functionality and productivity. These are, so that my question around that is, because it's being kind of forced through, how do we kind of prevent that? I know there's the kind of Palantir separate side of things, but this is happening at such a rapid pace and without any consent either. And then my other point is, I'm like declaration of interest, I'm a doctor. I was in the BMA conference this week, in which they passed some very positive AI motions and sort of welcoming AI into the NHS, with maybe some provisos. I'm much more similar to what your perspective is, that I think there's actually very limited benefit to AI, and I don't think the vast majority of people would consent to their data being put into AI systems. So I'm wondering about that. And the last point I just wanted to make, which I don't think has been touched on, is about the resources that are being used for this. And about how perhaps that is, well, obviously we're using AI, but we haven't even thought about, we have an AI sort of percentage of how much damage that's doing to the environment. So every time we're using AI, that is creating this damage. And how do you sort of campaign against that in a logical way?
Thanks. Yeah, women just there, Linda.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I'm Clara Bailard from United Union. I guess my question is around surveillance, and obviously with Palantir in the NHS, you've got 2 things there. You've got a private company gathering that data for use in a state apparatus. There's a question around, if it was publicly owned, is that something we would accept? And yeah, I guess my question is around the use of those AI or private company in other government department, because we've seen recently that Sadiq Khan had blocked a contract with Palantir and the Met Police. There've been talk about DWP using AI system to assess benefit claimants, potential big impact on disabled people, and the Home Office using AI system to help with processing asylum seekers' claims. And in particular, I was in the press recently about assessing the age of young teenagers who've come across. So yeah, I guess that's my question. And also just wanted to briefly plug early in this conference that there is like the first of campaign groups that is dedicated to campaigning around AI that I invite everybody to have a look at. It's called Pull the Plug, and they had a few physical protests in the last few months about it.
Okay, thanks.
First question on the laws of robotics. Could we, not unless we manage to also say that a human shall not kill a human. I mean, because there is no killing that's being done except by humans in this. It's just a kind of delegation to an automatic system in the same way that a time bomb is an automated killing machine. And so, although, I mean, I appreciate where Asimov is coming from, I think some of those kinds of arguments tend to lead you down a way of trying to engineer your way out of what is a political and social problem. And that I would tend to push back at that way of framing a campaign for that reason. Copilot being pushed for free, yes, that's because Copilot is rubbish and it's the only way that people will be forced to use it. One of the things that is quite interesting is that there has been this massive race to use a lot of AI by large corporations, including for so-called agentic AI, which uses vast amounts of AI tokens. There's this phrase called token maxing. It turns out that in many of the sort of blue chip companies that are doing this, they have run out of their entire budget for this, because what were people doing with it? They were converting PowerPoints to PDF documents. So they weren't doing anything very fancy with it, and this has caused endless amounts of large costs to the company and a wave of panic running through, including companies like Amazon. Possibly not the PDF to PowerPoint thing, but also even in its applications for programming. Any so-called productivity improvement delivered by automation is a trade union issue and is an issue for collective bargaining, organising, and preferably strike action to enforce at least terms of the introduction of any automation which are more favourable to the workers concerned and the society in which they live. So, I mean, I do think I know there's a session this afternoon, but we do need to talk about how we can collectively push back. On the question that Clara raised about surveillance and private versus public ownership, this is where I think there is a problem if you limit it to that question of just private versus public. Obviously, Palantir is a bad private company, but the British state, which is a public institution, is doing very bad authoritarian things, in particular around repressing protest. And that's one of the drivers, actually, for certain bits of the state to adopt, Palantir's products. It's not necessarily because Palantir's products are that good, but the reason the police want to do it is they want to actually build a very authoritarian state apparatus. So we have to challenge the drive towards authoritarianism, defending the right to protest, as well as taking up the questions of the misuse of resources. And certainly, absolutely, we can take on the big tech companies from the US, but having British Union Jack on an authoritarian AI system will not help us. We actually also need to kind of push back at the construction of the systems altogether is what I would say on the private public question.
Oh gosh, okay. Well, I mean, I agree so much with what Anne has said, and I certainly don't feel the most qualified to answer a lot of the questions that have been asked. And I guess with the background I come from being around health and health campaigning, in terms of that first question around kind of the push for AI in our health service or technology associated with AI in our health service, I guess part of the resistance of that, I think, is again, addressing the narrative that we have around health and well-being in our society, because it seems like the only functionality of these kind of softwares in our health system is to make them more productive. It's kind of putting a patch on the cracks of the dam, which is bursting. We're not truly addressing the key roots of poor health and well-being in our society. And so much money, time, and attention is being spent on this question of how can we get more of these softwares into our public services, and particularly the NHS. Yet we start to forget that actually there are all these other aspects of our society that we are kind of that slipping the ball, or like we're just no longer addressing, whether that be kind of housing and how that addresses our health, the environment and how that addresses our health, our communities and how that addresses our health. We're so focused now on this technological revolution that we are forgetting the fundamental pillars. And so really we need to be kind of reintroducing that into the conversation, and how we can go back to those pillars. And I guess it's, again, I will always say it, at the moment, it seems to be coming down to grassroots organizing and kind of working together, whether that be kind of tenants unions, kind of health unions, trying to get that conversation to change and resist this kind of conversation entirely being around technology. And then I guess, going back to that question then about surveillance, yes, it doesn't necessarily, I think there's a level of protection that we will have if it's under a public service, but that will only hold up to a certain extent when the political forces can change kind of what legislation may kind of allow data to shift. So we have, for example, Reform UK in their Operation Restoring Justice manifesto explicitly saying that if they were in power, they would create a data hub where all the data from the NHS, DVLA, Home Office, police gets shared to be able to enforce deportation of migrants. And so, that might not necessarily, I think what we're seeing is having the likes of Palantir creating this infrastructure where all that data can be shared, at least having it under public ownership. There will be, I think, a level of safeguard and protection, but I guess it will only hold up to a certain extent if we allow kind of the political narrative to shift in that way.
Thanks. Right, we're actually nearly at 12 o'clock. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to take more questions right this minute, because it's going to be 3 question and answer. There's going to be other opportunities. And actually the final session is a bit longer so that people can, because what I really want to do is people to talk to each other about what are the concerns, what are you facing? And then you can bring those into the conversation in the next section, which is about the environment. And the final session is about what's happening to our jobs, our culture, and our creativity. So kind of everything, really. And that will be a bit longer. So I have got, I've taken a note of who's put their hands up, so I won't forget. But I just want people to have an opportunity to do a bit of chatting before we break for lunch. It's also quite hot as well. So if you can just do that for 15 minutes. Lunch is going to be from 12:15 to 1:15. And like I said, you can go out of the building, obviously. You can have your lunch in here. And don't forget, there is stalls and a book stall and everything in the Congress room. So go and take a look in there as well. So introduce yourselves. Enjoy. Oh, yeah, sorry. People who find the room hot and noisy, if you want to go into the room with Ellen at the back, and you can have a slightly calmer environment to talk in. So if anyone wants to do that, if you go through with Ellen. Thanks.
Oh, no, I'm very... So you can see the slides. That's what Owen's going to do. Oh, I'll do the same thing. Yeah, fine. Yeah. Okay, so do you want to sit that side of me? Yeah. And maybe when you finish going, try to sit the other end. Does that work? Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant.
So we're going to start again in about 1 minute, if you'd like to take your seats.
We went down the hole.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm glad most of you have managed to hang on and cope with the heat. I think you'll all agree we had a great session this morning, and now we're about to have another brilliant session on AI and its impact on the climate. So we've got two superb speakers from Friends of the Earth and Global Action Plan, but we're just going to start with Suzanne Jeffery telling you a little bit about the campaign against climate change and the Trade Union Year of Climate Action.
Thanks, Linda. Hello, everyone. And I was supposed to be doing this a little bit earlier today, but unfortunately the train that I was on was the train that had not been cancelled ahead of the one that was cancelled because of the problems that we've got with heat at this moment in time. More on that in 1 minute. So my name is Suzanne Jeffery. I am chair of Campaign Against Climate Change Trade Union Group and of Campaign Against Climate Change. This is our banner. I noticed I've hung this up very, very badly. It arrived with me off the train. So you're missing quite a lot of that banner. You're missing no to austerity. You can see a little bit of yes to climate jobs. We should probably say no to austerity, no to militarism there, because that's clearly where the squeeze is coming from, the funding that could be spent on tackling the climate crisis, and our trade union group there, and for a future that doesn't cost the earth. And I think that's clearly a very important part of our message. And I shall have to say thank you to everybody who has organised this. It's so far been a really excellent event. I'm sure it will continue to be, and much needed. Originally coming out of an hour-long or an hour and a bit long online session that we hosted as Campaign Against Climate Change. And there was a clear desire for much more discussion, more in-depth about AI and its implications and its ramifications. The first session was a really, really great start to this conference. And it's an absolute pleasure to be hosting it jointly with Manchester Climate Justice Coalition. I should say also to thank various unions that have sponsored today's event financially and politically as well. PCS, Stockport Unison, local government branch, Manchester Metropolitan University, UCU. I think we have comrades and colleagues there from that university branch, and Trafford's Trades Council. So it has some trade union support, which is really, really important and excellent to see. Last year, Campaign Against Climate Change Trade Union Group, we helped to initiate a year of trade union climate action. And I would say that the last few days have been no better example of why we need to do that and why the climate crisis is a working class and trade union issue. It was writ large in the extreme temperatures that we've experienced in the UK and across Europe in the last few days, where we have seen workers and workplaces sweltering across Europe in dangerous temperatures caused by our climate crisis. And I think it's really important that when we do involve ourselves in this debate, in which we have to do both as active union members campaigning for safety in the workplace, but also as climate and trade union activists engaging in this debate around the climate crisis, we must make sure that we do repeat that. These are extreme temperatures caused by the climate crisis and caused by our failure to tackle that climate, successive governments, big business, oil and gas, etc., etc., etc. We've had bus workers in temperatures that are extraordinary in their cabs. I wanted to just give you one little story from this week. I was on a bus coming home from school, and obviously, I didn't say I'm a school teacher. Our schools have sweltered. We've needed to organise to call for closure or for early closures, and we've tried to manage with very difficult circumstances. We've seen health workers have to call critical incidents, hospitals not operating because operating theatres can't operate, machinery has broken down, and that's before the human experiences. One little example I want to give you, I was on a bus coming home from work in the middle of the week, The bus driver, I don't know if you have the same messages here on the buses in Manchester, came on the tannoy to say that the bus would need to stop to regulate the service. So that happens quite regularly. There's too many bunched up and they need to slow down. And then the woman bus driver got on the tannoy and she said, "I'm sorry, everybody, it is too hot. I cannot continue to drive. It is too dangerous and I will have to stop. I will have to stop until I can cool down and it is safe to drive again." Now, I'll mention that incident, one, because it's real what was going on this week, and there'll be more of it, we know, in place. Secondly, because the response of the passengers was positive, was supportive, and people said, "You've got to do what you've got to do. We completely understand." And thirdly, it tells us that is an imprint of the kind of workplace organising that has been going on and needs to go on. That did not happen just simply because one person felt like that. That happened because people have begun to organise around that workplace, have begun to make demands for a maximum temperature, and have given the confidence that people to take individual action like that as part of, they know, as part of a collective. And we need to keep organising as part of a collective. I want to say 2 points to finish. The Year of Trade Union Climate Action needs to continue, but we need to pick it up, look at how we can organise around it. And my very final point is this. So if you are in a union, that's not my final point. If you're in a union, look on your website, get in touch with Campaign Against Climate Change. We've got a lovely page of resources and showing also what different unions are doing. But my very final point is this. We also have a debate within the trade union movement, and the Year of Climate Trade Union Action should be about taking up that debate within the trade union movement. I see colleagues and friends and comrades here from unions that are engaged in that debate. We have some leaders of some unions, Unite, GMB, for example, are pushing for more oil and gas. And are increasingly doing in a way which overtly denies the climate crisis, overtly encourages the appointment of ministers who have the same view as them, that they want more oil and gas, against those ministers which have been opposed to those things. It's falsely echoing a line that somehow our energy crisis is caused because we're not digging enough oil and gas in the North Sea, that somehow our energy bills will go down if we are. These are false. These are lies. That is not the reality. And we do need to stand up within our own unions and debate that. And hopefully we need to win. We need to win that argument. We do need a just transition, but we absolutely also need a transition that can tackle the climate crisis, because things are set to get worse. A date for your diary, 31st of October. We'll try and bring some of these elements of the Year of Trade Union Climate Action and what next together by a conference on the 31st of October. So stick that in your diary. It will be in London, but I'm sure we can organise some brilliant tech something or other, which we can mean that people can attend in various different formats. But please put that date in your diary and get involved with the Year of Trade Union Climate Action. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Suzanne. My name's Linda Walker, and I'm one of the joint coordinators of Greater Manchester Climate Justice Coalition, along with Charlotte. I know many of you are already involved in our coalition, but if you live in Greater Manchester and you're not, please do sign up for either our mailing list or our WhatsApp group. We try to bring campaigns together across Greater Manchester, not just for climate, but for social justice, anti-racism, Palestine, anti-war. We've done a number of joint events with Friends of the Earth, Global Justice Now, and Debt Justice. And it's really crucial that all our campaigns come together and make us as powerful as possible to bring the change we need. So that little advert done. We've now got two fantastic speakers, and the first is Owen Espley from Global Action Plan. And they do a lot of amazing work on education, trying to create a future where kids grow up learning to fight for a better future, not just being drilled into the system. But their biggest campaigns are around AI and data centers, and they've really been at the forefront of the anti-data center campaign. So Owen's going to tell us about that. I'll introduce Mary afterwards.
Let's see if this works. Brilliant. Thank you very much. My name's Owen Espley, as Linda said, and I work at Global Action Plan, a small environmental NGO. It's a real pleasure to be here in Manchester. When I come here, I'm always reminded of its history and the history of working people coming together in the face of technological change. And I hope that what I'm going to talk about, we'll see that that struggle has to continue in the face of the big tech giants. So first, I'll talk about what is a data center. So a data center is essentially a huge warehouse full of racks of computers and networking equipment. And it usually has an enormous kind of operation to cool the computer chips that are operating there as well. Why do we need them? If you remember back when we first had computers, they probably stored the information on them actually on the hard drive in the computer. And then maybe a few years later, if you worked in an office, there might have been a cupboard somewhere which had some computers in it, and the information was stored then. Since following that, we had what's called cloud computing, where essentially the information is stored in one of those warehouses, and your computer becomes a kind of console to interact with it. The reason we're seeing such a rise in data centers today, or proposed rise, is because of artificial intelligence. And I want to draw a distinction here between generative AI and kind of, which we use the phrase artificial intelligence to cover a whole lot of different things that are often bundled together. Generative AI is about producing new stuff, whether that's like chatbots or new images or new videos even. And they're quite distinct from traditional AI, which could be machine learning, algorithmic work, the analysis of lots of data and making predictions based on that. And their environmental impacts are quite distinct as well, as we'll get onto. So what I want to emphasize, and hopefully these slides will help do that, is the absolutely huge scale of what's taking place around data centers. There's an estimated, Jensen Huang did this estimate of $3 to $4 trillion. More recent estimates are in the order of $7 trillion being spent by 2030, which is an absolutely huge amount of money. To put that in context, the US highways network, it's 13 times the size of the US highways network, which took about 5 decades to produce in a space of 5 years. We're talking about an absolutely huge expenditure of resources into building this infrastructure. If we compare it, so the line on the left is data center capital spending. The line next to it is the Marshall Plan to reconstruct Europe after the Second World War. Then we have the interstate highway system, US railroads, the number of years taken, the International Space Station, the Manhattan Project. We are talking about an absolutely huge transformation. Even this graph compares it to a percentage of GDP. And even still, it's only the US railroads through the 19th century that come close to the sort of transformative, that scale of capital investment that we're seeing. Let's go on to the next one. Let's keep on flipping through. So what is driving it? Well, big tech monopolies were allowed to become monopolies and extracted huge rents and had huge cash piles that needed a place to invest to get some return on it. And they are betting that AI, artificial intelligence, will provide that return. The UK government has drank the Kool-Aid and makes no apologies for snuggling up to US big tech behind its growth agenda. The use of AI in warfare, as we were learning about earlier today, means some see these huge levels of investment as necessary in a global arms race. And then lastly, the big tech and big state. The relationship between state capacity and AI is also a driving force behind it. In the UK, and this map's quite out of date, it's a massive job to keep it up to date because so many new proposals come on every single week for data centers. We see the distribution of proposed data centers. A majority, about 70%, are around London. And then we also have some in inner cities. The ones which seem to get the most attention, particularly in the Tory press, are in the green belt. And then you have some in what you might call post-industrial areas, former brownfield sites, particularly on former power stations that have been decommissioned. The reason for that is because they can connect to the grid transmission network. So I want to talk about data centers and their energy use. And you can go to the next one. The International Energy Agency estimates that a typical AI-focused data center consumes as much as 100,000 households. Some of them that we're seeing built are 20 times that amount. There's one in Southall that's 500,000, the equivalent 500,000 households. They use as much electricity in 2025 as the population of sub-Saharan Africa needs in 2.5 years. So if we're talking about the colonization of particular resources. So one data center in Elsham required, they estimated, used as much greenhouse gas emissions as 5 Birmingham City airports, essentially, which is an absolutely huge amount, 3.7 billion kilowatt hours of energy, almost 1 million tons when running at full tilt. And that's based on the current energy mix, which has quite a lot of renewables in it, of the UK electricity grid. But what... Oh, we skipped one. Recently, Ofgem released in a consultation, they released a figure saying that there were 140 proposed data centres that applied for grid connections, and they would require 50 gigawatts of energy. They also, in the same thing, mentioned that on a peak electricity day, the UK used 42 gigawatts of electricity. So we're talking about an energy demand that would double the amount of electricity that the UK needs to produce. We did an analysis with our allies in the tech justice group, Foxglove, where we looked at 100 proposed data centres. 10 of them had estimates for the carbon emissions. Taking their own figures, that would amount to roughly the equivalent carbon emissions that are saved in the UK from converting to electric vehicles. And all of the, if you think about all of the campaigning that has gone into helping drive that shift. Aha, what about Netflix? I'm going to stop that right there. So here we have a figure from 2021 to 2024 of the energy use from some of the big AI companies, Microsoft, Meta, Nvidia, Google, etc., and Netflix. In this time frame, Netflix's revenue went up by 50%, and yet that wasn't matched by a commensurate increase in the energy. If we go look back at internet traffic and data center workloads, since about 2010 to 2020, data center energy use has more or less flatlined, whereas the energy use of, whereas the internet traffic's come on. So the idea that just because the economy has been digitizing, we need to go to much more energy use is a myth that I want to kind of bust. The next myth that I want to bust is this idea, which was quite foolishly, I think, repeated by the government minister in Parliament, saying that AI, the benefits or the efficiencies that AI will bring about could outweigh the additional electricity demand. It's hard to imagine that when you're talking about doubling the electricity demand. There was a study by some allies that looked at 150 claims about the climate benefits of artificial intelligence. 97% of those claims related to what we call traditional AI, predictive models, narrow applications of generative systems. Only 4% related to what we call consumer generative AI systems, such as chatbots trained on large public data sets. Of even more damning, that research found that 74% of the claims made about AI's climate benefits were unproven. And where the claims of traditional AI are made, they tend to rely on weaker forms of evidence, such as corporate websites, rather than peer-reviewed academic science. Only 26% cited published academic work, and 36% didn't cite any evidence at all. And indeed, what we see, some of big tech's biggest clients are the fossil fuel companies who see AI as a way to accelerate the extraction of fossil fuels. Here's an estimate from, I think it's McKinsey, is it? No, Wood Mackenzie, about extracting more barrels of oil. And if we go on, they've been absolutely open about it. This is something Jansen Huang said when he came with Donald Trump to the UK, that they're really clear that it's impossible to bring enough renewables on stream in the speed is needed to meet the energy demands of data centers. And they want to bring more gas, electricity generation in order to power that. This is a photo of xAI's data center in Memphis, a thermal image of it showing the unabated gas being released, including some umber methane that has dramatic air pollution effects on the local population. One data center, because data centers need to operate 24/7, they need a continuous electricity demand. You can't switch them off when there's no sun for your solar panels. They have backup generation on site as well. Often diesel generators. An estimate from one data center in Edinburgh calculated that it was equivalent to 100,000 idling cars when they do the testing regime. So if you have a backup generation, you need to test it's going to work when you need it. And so monthly or every other month, they fire them up, and those have significant air pollution impacts. Let's move on. Just another insane example of what's happening in terms of Yes, let's move on. And we know that the companies are successfully lobbying to keep intransparent their emission, energy use and water use. Let's go on. We did analysis and it showed that I think it was about 70% of data centers are proposed in areas that are already water stressed or will be water stressed by 2040. And if we carry on, what the contradictions inherent of that massive investment in data centers are huge. So they've got the climate goals that are being lobbied. Recently, the EU big tech openly lobbied for the abandonment of the EU's climate goals in order to drive AI. There was an estimate done that showed that the UK government's estimates of climate emissions could be 100 times out of wrong. When that got published, if we go on to the next slide, the data it was based on was suddenly removed from the website, and then lo and behold, the next one, the UK then released it on a Friday afternoon when it wouldn't get any coverage, that they'd increased it by 100-fold. But we also know that in West London, houses have been built but haven't been able to have stood empty because they can't connect to the electricity grid. Oh, let's go. And when you're attempting, there's a really serious issue that if you're trying to decarbonize other industries and the data centers have taken all of the available electricity, is there going to be enough left for the other economic sectors? We also know that when they did an analysis in Virginia, which is a concentration of data centers, it took $33 million of investment in data centers to create one job, 400 times the cost, the normal investment to create a normal job in IT. And we know from other countries that in Ireland and the US, there have been studies about the impact on electricity bills as the cost is passed on to consumers. It's an area that we know the government admits there'll be some impact in the UK, but it needs a lot more study to really figure out how they're being passed on. We're looking as well, particularly at planning decisions, individual site, and the examples that we're seeing are not that reassuring. So the one that was 5 times the size of Birmingham City Airport didn't have an environmental impact assessment. They didn't think there was significant effect on the environment. And then there's also a lot of rules. So the corporate accounting for climate emissions don't really count the hourly by hourly matching that you need to make sure that you're actually talking about renewable energy that will meet the demand of a particular data center. We, together with Foxglove, challenged one of those decisions for a data centre in Buckinghamshire, and the government admitted that it made a serious logical error in approving the data centre because they hadn't adequately addressed the environmental claims that were made by the developer. We won a case there. Well, we won that the developer ended up making legally binding the environmental commitments that they'd made, which is why we're calling for a moratorium. We need a proper plan in place to be able to say how many data centers do we need, what's their impact going to be, and how are we going to mitigate them. The other thing we want is what we call Beyonce, bring your own new clean energy. But if you carry on, but we're supporting, my work's supporting different communities around the UK who are facing data centers. We had a day of action in the end of February with several different actions taking place. And every day I'm getting more and more phone calls from people in different places. This is in Havering, one of the Green Belt campaigns where they're facing an enormous data center. We don't know who the end client for that data center is going to be. This is just outside Brick Lane in the Truman Brewery. The community there has been campaigning for social housing in that site for over 10 years. And yet they're very worried that a data center will be the kind of stalking horse that allows a proposal to get through. We also know that in those post-industrial places, people are concerned about, will this investment bring jobs? And as I explained before, there's very few jobs with a data center. It's unlikely to lead to the kind of economic revitalization that those post-industrial, deindustrialized places so desperately need. But it's also about bringing in lots of different campaign groups together, lots of different issues. Let me flip over. So, as well as those particular sites we're talking about, we also want to understand, like, people opposing nuclear, people campaigning for social housing, people talking about the cost of living. All of these different issues come to bear in terms of the data center build out. And that's what I hope you'll all consider today. Tech oligarchs are driving an incredibly huge rollout of infrastructure, one they expect to get an absolutely enormous return on. And we need to think through what is each of our roles in pushing back on that. Data center are not the whole of big tech's arms, because we've, the discussion we had earlier and the discussion we have after this. But data centers are a very specific place where it's possible for us to push back and get leverage, a point of leverage where we can push back on the big tech giants, one data center at a time. The big tech giants are attempting to shape our future. And in Manchester, that rich history of shaping a previous industrial revolution should inspire us about how we seize this moment, imagine and then build our power by connecting across different issues, so across sectors and geographies, and establish a movement that really can take on that big tech power. And I want to emphasize to you that I think data centers are a really important, specific point where we can start to push back on the big tech giants. Thank you.
That was brilliant. Thank you, Owen. Mary Stevens is the Experiments Programme Lead at Friends of the Earth, which means that she leads on innovation and systems thinking. So she's going to tell us a little bit about the international resistance to AI amongst some of Friends of the Earth's partners around the world, but also suggest some ways in which we could be using AI for the benefit of the planet. Mary.
So we're just checking. Yeah, I think those ones, brilliant. Just checking we've got the slides. Fantastic. Thank you very much. And first of all, I want to echo what Owen said about what a privilege it is to be here, actually. So thank you so much for having us. And big thank you to Owen for talking through that, giving you that backstory. I've heard versions of that talk a few times, but that's the first time I've heard the Beyonce principle, which I will definitely be taking away. So that was a learning for me. Thank you. So I'm gonna do two things today. I'm going to talk a little bit, as we just heard, I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of that wider international picture. And I'm also going to say a little bit about, in the context of this question about, it's not inevitable, whether there are alternative futures, whether there is a role for AI and a fairer, more sustainable future, and what that might look like, and what it might look like to be for something as well as just what we're against. I'm sure many of you will be very familiar with Friends of the Earth, but for those of you who don't know us, we are an international environmental justice campaigning organisation, and we work with communities in the UK and across the world to build power and demand a greener, fairer future, including here in Manchester. We've got some friends from Manchester Friends of the Earth here, so if Pete and Ali want to give a wave, that would be lovely. They've got a stall out the back, which is brilliant, so if you want to talk to us afterwards, also, we're available for that. So next slide, please. So at Friends of the Earth, we've been working, and particularly with my sort of innovation hat on, we've been working on this topic for a little while, since 2018. This is a report we published in 2025, co-authored with a wonderful co-op called We Are Open, which sets out, as it says, some principles and practices to guide climate justice and digital rights campaigners. And I think we take a kind of two-pronged approach. So actually, we have a kind of an approach to AI, which is really framed around a kind of just enough narrative, a frugal adoption perspective, but also a really strong advocacy strategy. Next slide, please. But alongside that, we've also been supporting Global Justice Now's campaigning. Some of our local groups, including in places like North Ockenden, Hillingdon, and so on, have been involved in this kind of campaigning. We've published a policy position that sets out our view on data centers in a bit more detail, and also, we're very lucky to have a kind of an in-house planner who has that specialism. So we've published detailed guidance for communities that might be dealing with a data center application in your area. So if you want to know more, I think there's a QR code outside, you can look that up, but if that's something that would be useful for you. And we're looking, if there are more resources that would be useful in communities like that, I'd love to hear from you as well. Next slide, please. But also, alongside that, we have been doing some kind of exploring of what some of the kind of possibilities might look like. We've been taking part in hackathons. We've been running workshops for students around environmental, those were graduate students, helping them think about the environmental ethics of AI. And I think I want to stress that I think it's actually quite important to uncouple some of this, not to treat AI as like one big thing, but to see it as a bag of technologies. Karen Howe, who's written an amazing book called Empire of AI, which I thoroughly recommend, but she talks about AI as being a bit like transport. So, you don't put, I mean, this is a bit extreme, but you don't put private jets and sort of electric buses in the same category and talk about whether you're for or against them. We actually need to understand how many, what's the right tool for the right job. And yeah, I'll come on to that in a bit more detail, but I think it's useful to think about these things collectively. Next slide. There are a few other, we've already heard about the kind of the energy, some of the energy implications and what we're seeing in the UK. I want to say a little bit more about the kind of the bigger international picture, and also how this relates to climate action more broadly. So next slide. So one of the big issues is also about what generative AI in particular is enabling. We are really concerned about the scope for generative AI to turbocharge disinformation. I think it's really interesting to note that even back in 2024, 32% of UK chatbot users, so I think that was 13% of eligible voters, were asking for specific advice from a chatbot about who to vote for. Now, the Electoral Commission doesn't allow that, but it's not very hard to circumvent the chatbot to actually get it to give you advice. And of course, it's fed on the slop that's on the internet. So most of the time, it will tell you to vote for parties that are antithetical to climate action, for example. Yeah, we're also, Owen's already talked a bit about enabled emissions, how AI is actually powering further extraction of fossil fuel. This is a really interesting example. Actually, this campaign is led by people who are whistleblowers from Microsoft. It's an interesting example of a form of worker organization, so look them up. Next slide. And obviously there are huge supply chain issues around critical minerals globally, but also the e-waste implications. Again, if you want to know more about this, this is a wonderful diagram that comes from something called Cartographies of AI, which you can look up. But also the AI and Planetary Justice Alliance has a lot more to say on this. But to just give a couple of examples. So a lot of this infrastructure relies very heavily on cobalt. 70% of the world's cobalt is sourced from the Democratic Republic of Congo. In just one mining community in the Democratic Republic of Congo, an area called Kolwezi, there are around 40,000 children working in what's called artisanal mining. Artisanal mining is a very euphemistic word for a very, very brutal practice. And when it comes to e-waste, actually, so the UK is one of the world's largest per capita producers of e-waste already. We've already heard a little bit about how the infrastructure demand, how big the infrastructure demand is. Most of the infrastructure and the servers and so on that are being constructed at the moment are estimated to have a lifespan of 5 to 6 years, which means that by 2030, AI servers could generate between 130 and 225,000 tons of e-waste every year. The overwhelming majority of that, even if it's labeled as for processing, is basically shipped to Ghana. For processing in Ghana, again in a pretty unregulated situation, which puts lots of people's health and lives at risk. So, and this is partly why, and this is an illustration of why at Friends of the Earth we're campaigning for a new Business, Human Rights and Environment Act, putting planet over profit. And it's really. The point about that act is it would hold UK companies to account for abuses in their supply chain, and it's really important that tech companies are also part of that narrative. So there's more information about that afterwards as well if you want to hear more about that. So moving on. And as I said, I think it's really interesting to understand that this is part of a global struggle. So I feel very inspired to know that our colleagues and fellow activists in Uruguay, for example, were involved and successfully campaigning actually for Google to reverse its plans on a hyperscale data center outside Montevideo, that at a time when already there was severe water shortage in Montevideo. On the top right is an example is from our colleagues in Malaysia. We've already heard a little bit about what's going on in Ireland. Ireland's a really interesting case study. I really recommend you look into what's happening in Ireland. Data centers already account for 22% of Ireland's total electricity consumption. In the UK, it's around 2.5%, so that's 10 times more as a percentage. And we heard about how much that's put onto energy bills, how much that's cost people in Ireland. But I think the figure that always sticks with me is that between 2018 and 2023, 100% of the new renewable capacity in Ireland went to data centers. So every single new wind turbine, every solar farm, all that new energy in Ireland went to data centers in that 5-year period. Like, so Ireland is where we might end up if we don't get on with this movement now. Moving on. But as I said, I think there's something really powerful and inspiring about how the resistance to these dirty data centers is growing. Between January and March of this year, it's estimated that protests resulted in the blocking or delay of over $130 billion of investment in the US just in 3 months, just because of protests. Some people are arguing that actually what's really interesting is data centers is probably the only bipartisan movement in the US. The US is actually the most tech skeptical country in the world now by some indicators, which I think is incredibly interesting, given that's where, well, maybe tells you something about, actually nobody really likes a tech billionaire, turns out. And some people are seeing the resistance to data centers as actually probably the biggest threat to the Trump presidency, which I think is actually really, because it's bipartisan. So I think there's something really interesting there. Yeah, I think, and it's worth noting that with that, there is a backlash coming. So actually the tech companies are increasingly looking to push data center opposition as to be treated under forms of domestic terrorism legislation as well, which is only what you would expect. But in a way, I think that is a sign that they are frightened and that we're winning, which is, strong. So I do want to say a little bit, though, about what some alternatives might be. And does it have to be a kind of all or nothing when it comes to AI? So next slide, please. And we've already seen this one. AI is, make no mistake, I do not think that AI is going to save us. I always have in my mind a conversation I had with a technologist, someone who's been working in kind of tech development for a long time, and I asked her, "What do you think about generative AI?" And she just looked at me and she said, "I think it is the last thing we need now." And I feel that really strongly. It's not going to save us, whatever the tech companies might say. But moving on. But I do think it's really important to acknowledge that there are useful applications. And in fact, there are useful applications, including some useful generative AI applications. We've heard a little bit about chatbots being powered by generative AI. The one on the right at the top, Cecil from Wessel, is a really useful example of a generative AI-based chatbot to support people to support disabled people to access the services, and in particular to navigate the benefits landscape. From a local social enterprise near where I live in Bristol. Full Fact, who are a really interesting campaigning organisation against disinformation, they're quite open that they are using AI to identify disinformation and then to pass it through human checkers, but it's enabling to check stuff that they wouldn't be able to do. They're picking up more stuff than they otherwise would be able to. So, there are more examples. I'm sure lots of you love the Merlin bird listening app. Again, completely AI powered. This all or nothing narrative, I think, is potentially a bit of a dead end. So what do we want instead? Well, the first thing is that it's really super important that we should have that AI needs to be constrained within planetary boundaries. And on this, we are totally aligned with Global Action Plan on this, that we need the government to set out a national framework for AI that sets out really clearly what we need, where we need it, what we need it for. Actually, these data centers are sort of black boxes. We don't know what's going on inside them. We don't know who the clients are. We don't know what it's for. We need to set out really clearly what that's for and how that is compatible with the government's carbon budgets. That is absolutely crucial. The government has promised a national framework and they're sitting on it possibly because they're finding it hard to tie those things together, but it's absolutely critical. That's what we need. Next. As part of this, really interesting, this was launched just last week. The C40 cities have just launched, C40 city mayors have just launched a global urban data centers pact, which they're getting mayors to sign up to. We think it's pretty good. It includes those demands about data centers must be powered only by new additional renewable energy, for example, which is one of the preconditions of being within planetary boundaries, that they mustn't cause water stress, that the heat needs to be reused in heat networks, those kinds of things. London has already signed up. I think you might have an opportunity coming up soon in Manchester to consider getting people to sign up for this pact. And I think actually it's a really, this is potentially a very timely and a really powerful advocacy tool. So have a look at that. Again, Pete put it out on the stool at the back, so you can go and actually have a look at a copy of it if you want to know what it says. Next slide, please. And I'd also really encourage you to look into some of the alternatives that are alternative visions that are being developed, particularly from global majority women. So on the bottom right-hand corner is an amazing technologist, a woman called Anita Gurumurthy. This was her speaking at a conference recently in London. She's the executive director of a brilliant Indian NGO called IT for Change. She is not naive about any of the kind of implications of this technology, but she also understands that they get it right and there is potentially some liberatory potential for people. That's her regenerative AI, a new deal for the new AI economy, which is about AI rooted in planetary flourishing, in meaningful and dignified work. And I think when those things are coming from people in the global south, I think it's really worth checking out what those people have to say. So I'd really recommend you look at that. On the top left is one of my heroes. She's a woman called, she's known as Mother Cyborg. Look her up. She's a community technologist from Detroit. She's been involved in building community-owned systems for years. She's been working with communities in Bristol, actually, where I live, in low-income neighborhoods, looking at, and this was from a workshop that she helped lead, what would a community cloud look like? How do we have these more specific purpose models? Next slide, please. So yeah, so I think one of my thoughts would be actually, instead of just thinking about kind of all or nothing, we should be thinking, instead of general purpose models, thinking about narrow models, thinking about using the right tool for the right, the right tool for the right purpose, problem first, not solution first, and designing the right technology around that. And this is my last slide, I think. So as a kind of some things to take away, the first thing I would say is really, I worry a lot about focusing those in an individual behavior and judging people who are using these technologies. I think that's the wrong, that's the wrong target. The stressed teacher who is using AI to generate lesson plans is not your enemy. The enemy is the big tech companies who are, pushing an unregulated model of this technology. And we really I think it's risky if we kind of, it's a bit like, if you're starting to say you're not welcome here if you're using this technology, it's like saying you're not welcome here if you're driving. You can't be an environmentalist if you drive or eat meat or whatever. We need to actually find the common ground and talk about the power and the politics underlying this and not focus on individual usage. So find the common ground, don't judge the users. Do stay curious about, some of these technologies, some of these other models, particularly like those change makers in the global south that I highlighted. And the last thing is, but actually this is really about putting planet over profit and focusing on corporate power, and being part of that movement that Owen set out, that we really need. So yeah, stopping dirty data centers by focusing on corporate power. That's it, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. So that's a lot of brilliant and disturbing information, but lots of ideas and inspiration for resistance too. It's coming up to 2 o'clock. We're supposed to finish this session at 1:15. We could overrun slightly, and I'm suggesting we should have 10 minutes for any brief, urgent questions and give the speakers a couple of minutes each to respond, and then just perhaps 10 minutes to have a discussion in our groups. So who's got a question, and could somebody take a mic? So the first was the woman right at the back against the wall. Oh, sorry, that's the hardest to get to.
Yeah, in this place, mining comes to mind. My granddad was a Durham miner. My great-grandparents were married in Jarrow Parish Church. I have a bit of an idea about what went on with mining. And we still rely on miners for the minerals. And it's not just the children, it is whole communities. And there's so little regard for the mining that is behind all modern gadgetry. Has anybody done an impact statement, not just on the data centers, but how much additional computer time and phone time are needed, and what the impact therefore is on mining communities in some of the poorest parts of the world.
Thank you. Next, right, there's can you get to the middle? There's a woman in the middle with it. Put your hand up. And then maybe come to Martin.
Yeah, thanks for all the, as you said, disturbing information, but really, really useful. I've been reading recently about a group of scientists sort of putting forward a sort of doomsday scenario to the European Union around the so-called dangers of the US and China building all the data centers and sort of Europe losing the race to that. That seems to have rattled quite a few of the European political establishment. I just would like to know your opinion as to these sorts of scenarios that kind of put us on a precarious situation, let's say, and whether you think they're valid or they're part of the myth around AI and data centers.
Could you just pass the mic forward? Thank you.
Thanks to the panel. I wanted to ask the panel to consider, and maybe the audience as well, the type of social movements we need. Because when Owen showed the map of at the start from the proposed data centers, I had a bit of a visceral reaction because it's almost identical to the map proposed for fracking sites back in the day. And one of the things I think when listening to you both about the data centers is actually the lies and the arguments they use are the same, that, oh, it will create jobs, it will boost the local economy, neither of which is going to be true. And the average number of jobs created around a data center in the UK is 50 to 100. And also the impacts are the same as fracking: pollution, large numbers of vehicles, an intensive buildings period, and of course the water damage and so on. And we had a lot of work in the Northwest to stop fracking. And we at the time, we always argued that it was important to oppose fracking and to do it at the sites and to block and have local communities involved and so on. But we never said it was going to be enough. And I think we can't stop data centers just on a one-to-one basis. We have to build a movement that is both on the ground in communities, but also is taking on wider arguments about the limitations of AI, how it won't benefit working people. Actually, it will undermine the total number of jobs in the long term and so on. So I suppose what I'm asking is what sort of movements we need that can be both direct action, but also taking on the bigger arguments.
Thank you. Should we take one more? Okay, perhaps the chap behind Martin.
Much as I love the idea of Beyonce, my question is this. If I am going to mobilize resources because I happen to have access to them to build X megawatts of capacity, wouldn't it be better if that was used for more important things? Is there an opportunity cost with this? And that goes back to asking the question, is it really necessary? And I think there's a vagueness about this, which I, in my climate community in Preston, face, that is majority of people have a similar abolitionist reaction to myself. But a lot of people think, yeah, it might be good, might be technically interesting. And I think we've got to be very clear about that. So my view at the moment is there is no argument for it in most cases. There is an argument for having access to statistical models to do research on biology and all sorts of things that we care about. But is there an argument that says, actually, it doesn't even matter if you bring your own energy. That energy should be being built for other reasons.
Thank you. Right, we'll give the speakers just a couple of minutes each to answer as much as they can of some of those questions. Who would like to go first?
I'll take a well, I mean, great questions. I'll take a couple and then pass on to Owen. The first thing I want to say about fracking, yes, I think this is the new fracking, and I think there's loads of lessons that we can learn from the success of the fracking movement, absolutely. And that combination of grassroots power and kind of national asks is exactly what we need to see. A couple of other things that I would say about that is that I think one of the things that we're hearing a little bit at the moment is, when we've been having conversations with MPs and so on, they're saying, oh, well, it's not really coming up in my community yet. So I think there's already an opportunity to kind of raise awareness. And I would encourage people to think about, for example, getting in touch with your local councillors and asking them, like, what planning applications have you seen coming through? What's, so that those signals are starting to come. People are starting to get those signals that this is an issue because they're not hearing that yet. One reason for that, incidentally, is because data centers are not currently a separate class in planning. So they mostly appear in planning as warehouses or other use cases. So it might not be visible to people. So there's a real opportunity here for you to go and just get this on the agenda, talk to your local councillor, see what's coming through. But totally agree about the fracking. I'm also on the mining and minerals question. I mean, yes, totally. And I'd never meant to imply it was just about children. I just used that example, but absolutely. And I think, there are lots of fantastic networks, people like the Corporate Justice Coalition, look up people like London Mining Network. I know it's not just about AI, but the AI and Planetary Justice Alliance. I don't think anyone really has a kind of comprehensive picture of exactly what the sort of, the mineral supply chain is, because it is pretty opaque, to be honest. But I think there's scope for much more transparency, and I think there are people trying to do good work in that. So look them up. I'm going to pass to Owen now.
Yeah, agree with everything Mary said. The mining, I think it's a massive issue that, like, the energy use in that and the water use in that alone is absolutely massive, and it's poorest communities around the world who have been impacted by it. In terms of this question about kind of competition between countries and the need to get on the race, it's real. That's an argument they always use. You've got to accept lower wages or you're not competitive. You've got to accept poor conditions, you're not competitive. You've got to, the list goes on endlessly. And what we need is decent standards. It's a repeat of a different argument. I agree about the fracking. We draw a lot of inspiration from that movement. I think in terms of, we don't know exactly what kind of movement we need. We need to start building it, and we'll learn as we go, is kind of what I think. Part of it, I think, for me, is all of the different kind of harms that we talked about today are related, and you sort of have a deeper understanding about one issue that then finds a place you can get traction on it in a different one. And for me, data centers are just so tangible, and they're so literally in people's back gardens, and it has to be a point where that big tech power really has gone from online to IRL, and that's where we need to sort of draw a line around it and say, this kind of expansion, you've colonized our minds through social media, but you're going to colonize our land as well. For me, it's just really important that physicality of data centers is something that we challenge. But I think we need the conversations to include the AI harms, because if we believe the hype about the growth that's going to be achieved of it, that will come from it, then people are very much, well, we need some growth, and maybe that's a trade-off with the environmental harm. So we need to dismantle that economic case for it just as much as well, and the jobs case and the rest of it, to really take it to pieces. Beyonce and are there things that are more necessary for it? I think that's totally right. And I think one of the things we need to flip a little bit in our head, through neoliberalism, we tended to all adopt, I think, a kind of consumerist mindset, where if consumers want it, that's the thing that drives things. Whereas in a constrained world, both supply chains being constrained, but also a climate constrained world, we need to be thinking about supply much more often. And that requires planning. And, I remember working on international trade in the early 2000s, and hoping for more industrial policy. But I didn't mean this industrial policy. I meant one that was built with people to say, what are we trying to achieve and what are the benefits, rather than one which just sees the alignment between the biggest, most powerful companies and the state against the people. And I think those kind of questions are really important. You have the government implementing a kind of national NESO, the National Energy Systems Operator, is doing energy planning for the next decades. They've reintroduced kind of regional spatial strategies, or SDSs as they're now called, to look at where does the energy, where does the transport, where's the infrastructure go. But what we're not seeing is a return of the kind of democratic accountability of those processes. So whether it's at the local, the regional, or the national level, really important decisions about who and where is going to get energy and what shape development is going to take place is happening. We've got planning taking place, but it's not democratic and it's not accountable in the way that it needs to be. And it's up to us to hold those elected people accountable. And I think there's sort of three different levels I tend to think of our work on. One is the kind of political work. Yes, we need to put pressure on our politicians and our elected leaders to say, where is your strategy here? How can you buy into this? Where's the framework? Tell me it adds up. Give us the sums, show us the detail, and really push them to get the kind of framework that we need. Then there's the individual intervention in sites. And that's the work we're doing with lawyers to try and make sure that, we campaigned really hard for the Climate Change Act, and it places legal duties on planning decisions to consider the climate change impact. And yet, when the government releases its draft national planning policy framework, suddenly the climate duties aren't there. It's guidance for local councillors, but where are the climate duties in it? The legally binding climate duties. So we need to push and make sure that system works as effectively as possible. And then lastly, the work I'm involved in with different communities. We need to organise in different communities, reach out across different sectors. The link between the cost of living of an electricity bill rising with the online harm of children on social media, together with all of the other harms, the algorithmic management Amazon workers suffer at work. If we make these connections and understand that they're all different parts of the same struggle, then that's how we're going to build the power eventually, which can take on these companies. And these companies are some of the biggest, most powerful, most concentrated amassing of wealth that humanity has ever seen. And if it's not at that moment that we need to realize that we need to build something to push back on them, then I think it's really important to realize that that's what's going to be necessary in this sort of circumstances, because they have a vision for the future. And what's absolutely terrifying about it, they've abandoned any pretense about caring about the climate. Half of them are sprouting Nazi nonsense. They have an authoritarian vision, and it's not one I want the future to look like. And it's up to us to stop it.
Well, I'm sure your heads are buzzing with ideas now. We should have made this a 2-day conference. There's just so much to talk about. So it's just after 10 past. So if you just have 10 minutes around your table to share a few ideas around campaigning, particularly around data centres, and then just a 10-minute break, just to stretch your legs, visit the loo, and we'll come back and start again at 25 to 3.
Recording in progress.
Okay, this is the final session of the day, and I just want to say a big congratulations for making it this far under these conditions. So this final session is how AI is affecting our jobs and wider society. But it's really, the way that I see it in my head, is jobs, culture, and creativity. So because it's impacting our jobs in a direct way, but also potentially just the creative way that we do our work, and certainly our ability to work autonomously in the workplace. I've already, sorry. I don't know if they're going to be able to do closed captions on me now because I can hardly speak, but I've already introduced myself this morning. So I'm an environment rep for PCS Union, which is the Public and Commercial Services Union, because I was reminded that not everyone knows the acronyms, but particularly amongst unions. So this session is mostly union speakers about resistance within the workplace. I'm very excited to say that we have actually now made connection with the United, oh my goodness, I actually don't know what UTA stands for, but anyway, Shireen is going to speak on behalf of tech workers. But just before she starts, and then I'll introduce the other speakers after that, but just before Shireen starts, I'm going to introduce Amin Hadi from Salford City Unison, who people may or may not know, but has been basically victimized in a campaign by the far right. And obviously there's a very deep connection between the far right and AI. So Amin's just going to speak for a few minutes.
Thank you. Okay. Currently I'm after defending myself from the far right at a Together rally in Piccadilly Gardens. A load of malicious complaints were made by the far right, including Tommy Robinson, about me on that day. and I ended up being suspended by my employer. I'm 4 months in now. I still don't know what the allegation is. There's been no disciplinary process. But they did have a meeting of the safeguarding group, decided that I wasn't fit to be a youth worker because of it. And I'm currently fighting that at the moment through my union and through the campaign. And I've had fantastic support from people that I definitely don't know. General Secretary of the TUC, people from head up of unions have all supported me. And it's been an amazing campaign, although it's a bit weird having a campaign about yourself at all. This is about a Labour council, unfortunately, capitulating to the far right rather than standing up to them. That may sound familiar to you when you think about their policies towards refugees and migrants at the moment. And unfortunately, that seems to be paving the way for reform, doesn't it? I read today that a number of reform councils have now said they've taken away the fact that there's a climate emergency. Even more shocking, they tried to do it somewhere in Norfolk this week, but they had to cancel the meeting because it was too hot. So they were stopped from doing so. That shows you an irony of the situation. We can't really allow these people who are climate deniers, misogynists, bigots, anti-trans, and anti-migrant and refugee run our world. So there is a bigger struggle at stake for me in my campaign to make sure that we do have the unity of people on the left to oppose the far right rather than capitulate to it, but that we actually try to organise. I'm confident that I'm going to win my campaign, but I think the struggle against the far right and the politics that they represent is a bigger struggle that requires all those movements to come together. And to say together, we organised a demonstration in London. Hopefully many of you were on it. That had 500,000 people on the 28th of March. There is actually a Northern Summit, and we're lucky the Northern Summit is actually in Manchester on the 17th of October. So if you go on the Together Alliance website, you'll be able to join up to that. And I'll lend you a weight because Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, other groups in terms of the environment are all a part of that wider coalition that are fighting the far right at the moment. So thanks for giving me the time to speak. I'm going to keep fighting against the far right and organising my union with my black members across the trade union movement, both for me, hopefully, and I'm pretty confident I'll win at some point, but hopefully sooner rather than later. And obviously that we'll be in a battle where we can actually stop the far right and reform taking office. We're involved in a campaign at the moment to stop reform being the GM mayor. It would be a tragedy for the city to have a bigot representing us at GM level. And so it's really important everyone uses their vote over the next few years. It encourages everyone else to vote to make sure we stop them from winning that election. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I mean, right, we're going to go, if the tech's working, we're now going to go to Shireen, who is in London. If you want to introduce yourself, Shireen, thanks.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shireen Nassau. It's weird, I can hear myself echoing in the room. That's disturbing. I am the Education Officer for United Tech and Allied Workers. I'm also a newly elected Green Councillor in Lewisham, and I have the cabinet position of Workers, Business and Skills. So that's what I've been up to. I really wanted to apologise for not being able to be there with you today. I was looking forward to coming, and I was actually trying to get there today, but unfortunately the trains had other ideas. Apparently it's become too hot for them to function, like it's too hot for reform to function as well. And I think that's all very fitting. So today we're kind of here talking about AI and the environment and a little bit about what we're struggling with here today, which is the result of the climate crisis. If nothing else, it's a reminder that technology doesn't exist in isolation. It exists in the real world, and it uses energy. It relies on workers, and it has consequences. At United Tech and Allied Workers, we organize everyone in a tech company, from software engineers to content moderators, game developers, data workers, and IT professionals. And we do spend a lot of time talking about AI because our members are the people building it often and using it, and increasingly they're being told that they're being replaced by it. So I wanted to start with something that might sound a little bit weird. I don't have the background of knowing everything that's happened in the conversations before this one. So if everyone was saying that AI is awful, I'm very sorry, because I am going to say I really do not think that AI is the threat that people think it is. Or I guess more accurately, I don't think that AI is threatening jobs in the way that we're being told. Because every time a CEO says that AI is replacing workers, I think we should ask the question, is it really AI? Or is AI becoming a convenient excuse to make decisions that companies already wanted to make? I think once we start asking that question, the conversation becomes a lot more interesting. So before we talk about jobs, I think it's worth spending a couple minutes talking about what AI actually is. Because if you only listen to CEOs or the newspapers, you would think that we've invented a machine that's become conscious and is about to steal all of our jobs. And that's not quite what's happening. When people say AI today, they are talking about a large language model. Now, that does sound technical, but the idea is really simple. A large language model has been trained on an enormous amount of data. So it could be books, websites, articles, computer code, and it learns relationships between words and ideas by looking at billions upon billions of examples. When you ask it a question, it's not thinking, it's not reasoning, it's not understanding, it's predicting, word by word, sentence by sentence. It's making an incredibly sophisticated prediction about what should come next. In other words, AI doesn't think, it predicts. Now that's still incredibly impressive. Predicting language this accurately lets it write emails, it can summarize reports, it can generate computer code itself, it can translate languages, and it can answer questions. But we shouldn't confuse prediction with intelligence. And that's important because a lot of the hype around AI depends on us believing that it's something magical. It's not magic, it's maths, it's statistics, and it's an enormous amount of computing power, which brings us back to workers. Because when you start thinking about AI as something magical, like a magical machine, you start asking a much more important question. Who built it? Who trains it? Who checks that it's right? Who labels the data? Who moderates the content? And who keeps all of this running? Behind every AI system, there are still people. If AI isn't magically replacing workers, then where are the workers? They're often exactly where they've always been. They're just hidden. Now, I don't know if you've heard about this. I'm sure lots of you have heard of this. But yeah, it kind of cracks me up a bit. So a few years ago, Amazon launched their stores and they created this whole like just walk out stores. So it looked really cool. You could just pick up like an item on the shelf, and then like you wouldn't have to sort it out, like go through and like scan all of the individual products. You could just like walk out of the shop and they would have caught everything that you picked up and they would have already charged you for it. So there were no tills, no cashiers, no queues, and it was presented as the supermarket of the future. And AI had become so intelligent that it could watch hundreds of customers at once and know exactly what everyone had bought. Yeah, that wasn't true, like, at all. Behind the scenes, there were large teams of workers, mostly based in India, working in horrendous conditions, reviewing the footage manually, checking transactions, correcting mistakes, and helping train the system when it got things wrong. AI was not doing all of the work. People were there. They just weren't visible to the customer. And I think that's one of the biggest myths about artificial intelligence. AI does not replace work. It just hides the workers. The tech industry even has a term that we kind of use for them. They're like ghost workers, quite similar to like ghost writers. So millions of people around the world spend their days labeling images, transcribing speech, reviewing content, correcting AI mistakes, and producing the data that these systems need to function. The irony is that the smarter AI becomes, the more hidden the labor that it depends on becomes. Because somebody has to tell the computer what a bicycle looks like. Somebody has to identify what hate speech is. Somebody has to check whether the AI has the right answer. Somebody has to clean data before the model ever sees it. And very often those somebodies are workers in countries where wages are lower, labor protections are weaker, and the public never even knows that they exist. And as trade unionists, we shouldn't ask whether AI is going to replace our jobs. We should ask whose jobs, under what conditions, and who is benefiting. Because if technology simply moves work somewhere where workers have fewer rights, that's not innovation, that's outsourcing with better marketing. Unfortunately, we've seen it happen ourselves at United Tech and Allied Workers. We were organizing TikTok. TikTok has like loads of content moderators. Lots of them were based here in the UK. I don't envy them. I would hate to do that job. Every single day they're reviewing the worst of the worst. They're literally looking at videos of violence, abuse, child exploitation, terror content, you name it, they were watching it all. So we were working with them to reach union recognition. TikTok said that they were going to go ahead with recognition negotiations. And at the last minute, literally like hours before we were supposed to meet with them, TikTok just laid off all of their content moderators. And they promoted this very publicly as they got rid of all their content moderators because AI was good enough to do their jobs. And so they didn't need as many workers anymore. Yeah, we were told, and so were those TikTok workers, that their roles were just cut. But that's not what happened. The work didn't disappear. Obviously, social media still does need moderating, and the videos still need reviewing. So much of that work was just shipped offwhere to workers in other countries that had worse terms and conditions. The work wasn't eliminated, it was just relocated. And that's a really important distinction. If AI genuinely automates dangerous, repetitive work, then great. We should celebrate that. We've worked a lot with content moderators in South Africa who have PTSD from having to look at this awful material all day long for like 16 hours a day. So yeah, I would be happy to hear that. I would be happy that they're able to shorten their working week or improving people's lives, but we should share the benefits. If AI becomes a story that we all tell while we're quietly moving jobs somewhere where workers have weaker unions and lower wages, then AI isn't solving inequality, it's just hiding it. And that's why trade unions matter, not because we're against technology, because in my union we're not. Technology has transformed lives. It can make work safer. It can remove repetitive tasks. It can help disabled workers. It can help us tackle climate change, really and truly, if it was ever being used for our good. But it's not neutral, and it really reflects the people who own it. We need to think about, will AI change work, and who gets to decide how our work will be changed? Would it be billion-pound corporations acting in the interest of their shareholders, or would it be workers that have a seat at the table? Workers don't lose power because technology changes. Workers lose power when they aren't organized. And that kind of brings me back to why I'm speaking to you from home today. And yeah, I can't hear any of you in the room, so I don't know if if I've been speaking for too long, but I couldn't get here because the trains could not cope with the heat, because we have a crazy heat wave right now. And every summer we are breaking another record on the temperature. And at the same time, we are racing to build one of the most energy hungry technologies that humanity has ever created. And I'm not saying that AI is inherently bad for the environment. It could help us model climate change. It could design more efficient buildings. It could improve renewable energy systems and reduce waste. And there is a lot of potential, but the potential isn't the same as the reality that we're currently living in. And every AI image generator and every large language model sits on a data center, and data centers run on electricity, and they use a lot of it. And the International Energy Agency, yep.
Yeah, you've done like nearly 12 minutes, so it goes quick. So if you could just sum up, that'd be great.
I am so sorry, everyone. Yeah, I can't hear any of you, so I don't know what's going on. I can't see you either, but yeah, basically AI is okay. It's not the worst thing in the world. And you can ask me more questions during the Q&A.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Shireen. Thank you. Right, I'm now going to hand to Sim Gill, who's president of the University of Manchester University College Union. Thanks.
Okay, so yeah, my name's Sim Gill, or Sim Gill, and I am currently, at least for the next month, president of UMUCU. Then I get maybe to relax and do something else for a while, although it'll still be union-based for some of my work. So I think I've been asked to speak because I can offer a little bit of an understanding of how the University of Manchester have attempted to cope with implementing AI, how they've done some of that and how they maybe haven't done it well. It is worth picking up the important thing, right? AI is a threat narrative. I'm not saying it isn't a threat, but it is a threat narrative. It's there, thrust down our throats all the time. It's going to take our jobs. It's going to remove skills. Okay, in the area I teach in as an academic, I teach in fashion technology, right? How to make products for people. I'm told AI is going to come in and do that work. It isn't. It can't do that work. AI can do what exists and is standardized and is familiar and is codified, but it can't come in and do skilled work. Okay, but the threat narrative is important because that is how we're kept under control so much of the time. Your job's under threat. Don't speak out. It's what keeps us as unions compliant. You know, your members are going to lose their jobs. But actually, AI is a threat. The threat narrative is the worst part of it. There are some stories of where it's used positively. I speak with other trade unions. One particular local branch is saying, well, actually, I advocate for the use of AI. Here's what we do. We take all the university policies, we stick them in a large language model. When we've got casework, we ask it questions, we get it with summary, and then we go back to the employer and we stick it to them, and generally we win, right? So you can use it productively in that way. It's just, that isn't what we're told. Similarly, I see it used in my areas of the sort of fashion technology field, but equally what people are getting out of AI, they're still coming back and having to check with an expert and make sure that expert then understands if the data's valid, if it's right. So it isn't the direct replacement that people might imagine. The University of Manchester's run wholesale into adopting AI, unfortunately. It's been forced on all of us. Lots of issues because we now have Copilot that runs alongside all Microsoft products. You can't open anything up. And it's a bit like that paperclip tool that Microsoft has. And it's like, how can I help you? And you're like, you can't. And then I speak to my colleagues and they say, I tried it and then it didn't help me. And now I say, just go away. And we can't turn it off, right? And that is a bit of a problem. We can't opt out of this. So there are really clear difficulties there. And it's possible we have a vice chancellor called Duncan Iverson. We might be calling him A. Iverson, because that might be more fitting for what he's doing. And there is that real concern about anti-intellectualism, what happens in an educational environment when people become reliant upon AI. And that is something that I think troubles people. And we've pushed as a union, and I think we'll push harder on this, for the university to be clear that as an educational establishment, it in itself is against knowledge being generated by something other than the individual person. And there is a real struggle that universities haven't created a narrative that pushes back against something like AI as a replacement for critical thinking and skills. But I wouldn't be in a trade union if I wasn't thinking about productive, positive things that we could do to change some of that. So, and some of the thinking I was doing whilst I was listening to the other great speeches here was thinking about what you guys can do. I mean, I'm only president of the union for another month and then it passes to somebody else. But actually, universities are civic institutions, right? And that means they belong to the civic culture of and society locally, right? The University of Manchester doesn't belong to a business. It belongs to the population of Manchester. It celebrates itself as a civic university, but there are questions about just how much that extends to engagement with people. So the type of things you guys can do, which can help push back against AI, is ask the university questions. So one thing, it's got to respond to FOIs. So you guys can ask FOIs, how much of an increase in cost has the adoption of AI, pushed onto the university itself? And because it's a civic institution and it belongs to the people, really, it is responsible for responding to that. So you guys should ask questions of it, share the outcome of any FOI with the trade unions. We can magnify those questions, but it also helps to make sure that such a massive institution with such an influence over local area is accountable to people locally. Similarly, the university has a General Assembly. It's restructured it a number of years ago, but this is how it engages with the great and the good. It tends to be businesses. I'll definitely go away from today and think, why aren't Friends of the Earth locally invited to General Assembly? Why aren't other social movements invited into that space? Why is it largely just business that I see there? And actually that is important, because then people can ask questions like, how does a university like the University of Manchester respond appropriately to the adoption of AI, the responsible use of AI? I can tell you that I've seen the student union push back in really positive ways about the troubling nature of AI and how it is used as a threat for them, how it will drive down their wages, how it will drive down the very job security that they should feel. And there are a lot of problems in that space. I think one question you could definitely ask is how an employer can manage without a threat narrative. And if it can't manage without a threat narrative, is it really the type of employer we want to have in Manchester? I'm not saying close the university down. I quite like my job, okay? But I am saying it needs to be responsive to the people in the local population and the type of threats that it might be accidentally responsible for bringing into that sphere. So, making demands of the institution is going to be important. And I think I didn't organize a speech. I think I've covered everything. So the last thing I will cover in this, and it is important, is there's a real lack of respect in the AI argument for knowledge itself and critical thinking. Like, the idea is to subsume all human knowledge into a machine and then the machine replaces stuff. I've seen the threat of automation in the area I work in, the area I research in. I've not seen it come to fruition. The threat's constantly there, but people are almost irreplaceable in lots of ways. And there is good stuff written, more than I could speak about how AI just can't do the type of human thinking we can do. The structured stuff that is easy and standardized, it can do, and it could run a standardized world. We don't live in a standardized world. So, the question to ask the university is this wholesale adoption of AI? And definitely ask our Vice-Chancellor. He likes to be liked. He likes to be liked by the local people. You guys should ask him questions. He's got an email you can access. Making people responsible for the choices they make, especially around something which is a threat, okay, it is important to do. So I'll stop there before I start rambling. Thank you, guys.
Okay, the next speaker is Laurence Bouvard, and she is an actor from Equity and is chair of the Screen and New Media Committee. Thanks.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you for making it to this point of the day. I know you're all hot and we've been talking at you. As Charlotte said, my name is Laurence Bouvard. I'm an actress and a voiceover artist, and I'm currently chair of Equity's Screen and New Media Actors Committee, and I'm an activist around AI in the performing arts. I originally came to the UK to train at Lambda, and I've spent my entire career in the UK entertainment industry. But I also hold degrees from Harvard and UCL, a couple of MSCs in tech, so I have knowledge from both sides of the AI issue. I, like many more of my colleagues than you might think, and despite those tech degrees, have always earned my living full-time as a performer. You may not recognize me, but it is highly likely that you will have heard my voice. We do not just entertain you with films and streaming series, but also with video games, audio dramas, cartoons, ad campaigns, audiobooks, and much more. According to a February 2026 report from the Creative Industries Council, the film, TV, and music sector of the creative industries remains the largest cultural subsector in size economically, alone contributing an estimated 23.8 billion to the UK economy in 2024. However, those of us working as performers in this sector, whether in vision or voice, are suffering badly from what has been up to now uncontrolled and unethical AI practices. Let me preface this by saying that artists in general face a strange duality in society. Everyone loves what we produce, the human creativity without which a culture withers. And yet simultaneously, since what we do for a living is qualitative rather than quantitative, and despite how much we generate in real terms for the economy, the default assumption seems to be that there are few actual skills involved in what we do, and that therefore working in the performing arts is not considered to be a real job. A concrete example of this can be seen in the UK government's list of recognized professions for those acting as a counter-signatory to an official application. A pub landlord is deemed acceptable, whereas an actor, no matter how successful or famous, is not. It is important to elucidate this innate societal trope as it lies behind concrete issues that professional performers face and which the rolling changes of AI are only making worse. The common perception is that while enjoyable to watch or listen to, performing is only fun or play, and thus merely having the opportunity to work in this field should be reward in and of itself, not worth paying for, not valuable enough. The assumption that follows from this is that performers' right to, among other things, adequate payment for the exploitation of our work and consent for how it is used, something which other industries take for granted, is seen as unnecessary and burdensome. All of this not only leads to performers' work being devalued both on an individual and a sector basis, but also puts performing jobs directly in the crosshairs of AI. If the work is so unskilled that anyone can do it and yet needs to be paid for, why not have a machine carry it out at half the cost? Foremost among the many products that AI companies have flooded the market with have been the synthetics and clones derived from actors' voices, images, physicality, and performances. I and my colleagues have watched in dismay as AI encroaches on our livelihoods, with synthetics now presenting corporate videos, dubbing YouTube videos into different languages, voicing audiobooks, all created from AI tech, and all jobs formerly done by performers. But please do not forget that without training data, AI would not exist. Without our images, our voices, our performances, the AI companies would not be able to create this tech. And yet the AI companies are snatching our voices, performances, and likenesses, training their algorithms on our data to produce a product that is meant to replace us without asking permission or providing appropriate compensation or remuneration. One colleague of mine had an AI avatar of him used by the Venezuelan government to spread propaganda and disinformation in Spanish, a language he does not speak. And some of you might be aware of the case of Gay-Ann Potter, the Scottish voice artist who forced ScotRail to remove the AI version of her voice from its announcements, which had been cloned without her knowledge or consent from work she'd done from a completely unrelated job. The irony is that this very material that we as performers are told has no innate value, that the tech bros treat as nothing but training fodder not worth paying for, is generating millions for those same tech companies that have grabbed it from us. 11 Labs, which is notorious for these practices, has been valued at $6.6 billion. Another is Fish Audio, where subscription plans can cost over $400 a year. And yet this is a company that Equity is currently issuing takedown notices to for illegally cloning and marketing versions of several Equity members. And even more ironically, this is such a lucrative market, Fish Audio themselves have been cloned. There is a scammed version of their website listed at the top of the Google search. This isn't just about protecting livelihoods and personal identity, though. It's also about protecting what it means to be an artist. As we've discussed today, AI in its most fundamental form is nothing more than statistics, Bayesian probabilities. AI is simply a pattern finder, no intelligence involved at all. Training on vast amounts of scraped data, it spews out the closest approximation of dead average of that data that the algorithms can manage. When AI succeeds, it succeeds because it has found the norm, stripped of outliers and aberrations. AI is born of stereotype. Now, that is absolutely brilliant if you are trying to find out what the earliest signs of Alzheimer's in the brain look like, and absolutely appalling when applied to the arts, which are based on celebrating the full range of human experience, especially the outliers and exceptions that AI is trained to ignore. Not only does it reduce our artistic output to trite, bland predictability, it also reduces us as performers to stereotype. Well, the very nature of arts and culture celebrates the diversity of being human. AI in one swoop threatens to wipe that out, replacing us with a norm based on training data that has bias baked in. And if you think I'm exaggerating, let me direct you to sites such as Murph.ai, where business subscriptions start at $5,000 a year, and where they proudly advertise the narrator voice and the character voice, as if there were only one kind. So, is there anything to be done? Can we as mere performers fight back when current legislation does not seem to protect us? Oh, yes, we can. Now that we are aware of what the AI tech companies have been doing, there's a growing sentiment both within the industry and, I believe, in society as a whole, that the wholesale scrape of our data is not fair and it is not right, and we as performers are fighting back. We want proper protections and consultation on how and where our voices, images, and work will be used. We want to be asked for consent for usage, for that usage to be limited, and to have the right to refuse. And we want proper remuneration that includes ongoing payments and percentages of subscriptions and sales. Many of you will have heard about our sister union SAG-AFTRA going on strike a few years ago over the lack of AI provisions in contracts. This year, the freshly ratified SAG-AFTRA agreement, which will be effective from July the 1st, contains strong protections against the uncontrolled use of AI. Back in December 2025, I, along with my fellow members of Equity, threatened strike action if the producers' organization PACCTU, with whom we are currently renegotiating our own agreement, did not meet our own demands for AI protections for performers. With a 75% voter turnout rate, of whom 99% voted in favor of striking, PACCTU soon came back to the table, and we have been promised AI protections that are no less than those SAG-AFTRA have, and may well be better. Equity has also put together an excellent AI toolkit for its members, which includes an explanation of our rights, as well as templates for takedown letters and contractual clauses. While the 1988 Copyright Designs and Patents Act wasn't created with AI in mind, it still refers to cassette tapes. We are covered to a certain extent by GDPR, which protects your face, your voice, and your likeness as sensitive personal data. We still have a way to go, but we are making progress. Now, if you search for the ethics of AI voices, for example, even the AI summary comes back with, AI voices raise important ethical concerns, including consent, privacy, and potential misuse for fraud or deepfakes. Responsible use requires obtaining permission when replicating identifiable voices and clearly disclosing synthetic content to audiences. Our pushback is working. Plus, Plus, there is a growing demand by businesses, too, that while a synthetic voice or image might work for a bland internal draft project where quality doesn't matter, the public is increasingly rejecting the use of AI for anything that requires excellence or creativity. And the business that ignores that could see its brand damaged. According to an article published a few days ago by Tech for Gamers, recent research has found, by tracking sales on Steam, a games outlet, that AI use in making a game leads to a 40 to 60% drop in its sales. The public is beginning to set boundaries. Finally, here's what else you can do, and I think this applies to AI in general. Number one, please stop believing the hype that is pouring out of these companies. It is not magic, there is no intelligence involved, and is not only going to get better, because it fundamentally lacks the human quirk. It is purely statistics. It might get a little better, but after having already scraped all the images and voices available on the internet and used all the water and energy resources, there's precious little left to add. And if it's not good enough now, when will it be? And number two, please ask each time, why? Why do we need it in this particular instance? There are some things AI does well, absolutely. It's a helpful search engine and pattern finder, a useful tool. But why do we need an artificial actor pretending to miss its parent, or a synthetic voice reading us a love story? So before you watch a video or listen to an audiobook, check to see if the performers are human. If not, then don't watch it, don't listen to it, don't buy it. The human workers in the creative industries will thank you, and you will be helping to protect human culture and creativity.
That was really, really great. Right, we're going to have a speaker from a bus driver from Unite, because what we're trying to do in this session is get like the broadest range of how AI is impacting on work. So we've had a tech worker, a university worker, and an actor. So that's quite a range. Unfortunately, Mansour, the bus driver, isn't able to make it today because of family illness. So Clara, who is, where's my piece of paper, is the Unite Not-for-Profit section, and she's on the National Industrial Section Committee, is just going to give a very short feedback. But just before she starts, I can also announce there is more water if people are needing more water. But Clara's just going to speak for a short bit. Thanks. I just said that. I said there is more, not no. There is more water.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, unfortunately, Mansour, who is also our executive committee member for the passenger transport sector, had urgent business at home. So I'm just going to be very short, but I think in Unite, with such a wide range of sectors, we've got 1.2 million members across, I think, 15 different sectors. It's not as straightforward what the impact of AI is in our workplaces. And, the scale and range of impact is just started to emerge. Last year in our policy conference, we had a really good debate around what is needed. And it was recognized that the first step for us is to actually document and research, the range of impact on our workplaces. We are concerned about the lack of regulation, and we absolutely need to have the right to have collective bargaining and around this issue of AI with employers, which is currently not covered by collective bargaining rights. But I just wanted to share a couple of testimonies that really resonated in my mind, and now wherever I go, I talk about those, because during the debate, we heard first of all about a young woman who worked in a bank call center. And there's nothing new about surveillance for call center workers. We always know that, they're being recorded, etc., and monitored. But recently, AI programs have been added to the monitoring system. And what she was explaining is that the AI program actually listened to the tone of their voice to assess how polite, how nice are they with customers, and automatically create a mood board about yourself or your performance that is then being used to, have chat with managers about your performance. That's incredibly worrying, especially with, the numbers are like abusive customers that they can deal with, then if you raise your voice in the circumstances, it's only understandable. So that was quite worrying. The second testimony that, I was hoping Manso will be able to cover, and I think it's more like bus drivers in London, where AI has been introduced onto their driving system as a health and safety sort of like measuring tool. Initially, it was something that was voluntary, just like a bit of a trial. So people were like, oh, that's cool, I'll just try it. And then it's been implemented in a number of buses in, certain companies. What they realize is that the AI is not just here for health and safety. It's also about monitoring your performance. But worse, the AI is learning to drive, and that's what they've realized now, is that's what's going on. I think everybody would have heard that we are expecting driverless taxis to be introduced in London soon. So that's a massive threat to our members who are taxi drivers. We do know that they already operate in certain countries. So like, I don't know if any of you have seen the documentary in Los Angeles where you've got those driverless taxis. And funny enough, a bit of hope is that a group of activists has found a way to actually just put them out of order with just placing a little bit of tape on the side of the car where the radar is. And that's actually just stopped them from being used. So they're not that clever. So yeah, like quite a lot of AI around any jobs that's related to driving. And I was actually having a chat yesterday with a friend, and the president of the Bakers Union, Ian Hodson, was telling me about in Warburton, they've introduced AI on the forklifts. So again, as an health and safety feature, but no doubt AI is learning to drive the forklift. But positively, they've just opened negotiation with Warburton to negotiate a AI agreement. So that's absolutely crucial that, collective bargaining about the use of AI in your workplace is something you should be demanding now. All right, I'll leave it there.
Thanks very much. Right, so the final speaker in this session is Ian Allison from Troublemakers. Again, going to talk more about the industrial side because unfortunately our reps weren't able to come. So Ian's going to talk a little bit about Amazon, but you've only got 5 minutes.
Okay. Hi everyone. So Troublemakers is like a network of troublemakers trying to make our unions more militant and effective. For myself, my background, I worked 30 years in the IT industry and represented IT workers on Unite's executive council for 10 years. And I also led the first national strike in the industry in Britain. But I wanted to talk about particularly about a visit we had recently in Manchester from Amazon workers from the US. And I'm also involved with Manchester Trades Council, which is like umbrella group for trade unionists working or living in the city. And one of them was a driver, and he was describing similar issues to what Clara was just talking about. So you had this device in the cab with cameras pointing in all directions, so looking at the road, looking at you, but tapped into the instrumentation. Now, that's not particularly new. What's new is it's being monitored live by AI, so they get warnings popping up on an app immediately if they were perceived to have done anything wrong. And then obviously once you get back to the depot, manager gets to back that up as well. And that was, that was really worrying hearing about that. And then in the discussion, someone puts their hand up and says, yeah, and there's a restaurant in Deansgate across there where they've connected AI to their CCTV, and they're now monitoring the performance of waiting staff using AI. And when we were, we took the Amazon workers to the equity office, and we had someone from the Fire Brigade Union there as well. And guess what? They're just getting cameras. They're being told they have to work. And the bus driver example came up as well. So the use of surveillance technologies linked to AI is spreading across almost every occupation we can imagine. And quite aside from, the kind of protection of personal data side of things that our equity comrade was talking about, we know what this means in terms of work intensification. So in the Amazon warehouses, where people are monitored continuously, again, by AI in terms of their work performance, the accident rate
is more than double what it is in comparable jobs where that monitoring isn't placed. The work is so much more intensive. There's a rate you can work at for a few minutes normally, but in most jobs, you have opportunities to at least back off a little bit and recover. What they're trying to do is to drive you to work at your maximum rate continuously throughout your shift. It's like a 21st century version of Taylorism for those who know what that was from over 100 years ago, trying to make workers work harder. So we've got a real problem with that surveillance side linking to AI. And I want to argue that one of the things this means that we have to do in every workplace is not just think about AI, but think about the surveillance. Because surveillance in the workplace isn't anything new. I mean, 2 different workplaces I've worked in, we've had disagreements with management about the use of gate pass access. You know, we have to wave a card at a little fob thing to let you into a room or a building. And in one case, they were trying to use it to discipline somebody from being away from a reception desk when that they were supposed to be at because they'd gone to the toilet. And in the other case, they were trying to use it to monitor whether people were in the office or working from home. Now, in both cases, we defeated those attempts to use it, and we defeated it by arguing that when they introduced those technologies, there'd been a purpose specified that data was to be used for, and that purpose was not for the monitoring of employees. It was supposed to be for security and safety reasons only. And we argued that if they wanted to start disciplining members based on that data, then they needed to start disciplining the managers for misusing that data, which is a much more serious effect. So I think one of the things we need to think about in every workplace where there's data collection going on, whether that's some bit of software running on someone's laptop, or whether it's a camera, or whether it's a pass that you have to use to access certain areas of the workplace, we need to be fighting to get as robust and narrow as possible definitions of what purposes that data can be used for. So that whether it's AI or not, management can't use AI as an excuse to be using that to be intensifying work and disciplining people. Because I tell you what, it's most workers' nightmare, isn't it? The idea that you have the manager on your shoulder all day, every day, monitoring everything you do. That would make life absolutely intolerable. It'd be bad for people's physical health, be bad for people's mental health, and we have to fight that hard.
Okay, looking at the room, everyone's looking slightly, slightly sort of need of a nap. Not really. But what I'm going to suggest is that rather than go into a kind of whole round of questions and answers, because actually quite a lot of people, what I'd like tables to do, because we're at 3:30, is just take 15 minutes at your table. You can get a glass of water, take 15 minutes. Because actually what I want, the idea of coming out of this conference is not just great. We've had, a fantastic conference. Lots of people came in the heat. But actually, what do we do next? So what I'd really like to do is for tables to discuss what can we take away from this conference? What's missing? What do we need to do next? And then what we'll actually do is we'll have a bit of feedback from tables, and then we'll probably call it quits for the day because that's probably enough. So people can take the next 15 minutes to say, what do you want us to do next? And then we'll do a final summing up. Okay, thanks.
And very different.